I had to leave. Everything was so unbearably wonderful. The only alternative to leaving was vomiting on the spot, which probably wouldn't be welcome in the lobby of a four-star luxury hotel. I could no longer tolerate a whole bunch of stuff. The hotel had been chosen by our resident hero, Ralph, and of course, like everything he touched, it was damn near perfect. Just one minor flaw would have made it tolerable, but there wasn't one. My perfect friends were even worse. Ralph, the guy every man aspired to look up to. He wasn't just handsome, he was a million times handsome. He was polite to the last detail, always pleasant, was the life of any party. He was the best buddy anyone could wish for. No bad breath, never a hair out of place, always fashionable. He was every mother-in-law's dream. And then there was his wife, Danny. Danny was loved by everyone, literally. There was no exception. Every girl had been trying to be like her since we were little kids. They couldn't even hate her for being perfect. She was too cute for that. Beautiful, though not outstanding, with a personality that just made people flock to her. Of course, all the boys instantly fell in love with her, and of course, since she was always Mr. Perfect 10's girlfriend, she was always out of reach. Then there were Maria and Paul. Their role was to be the perfect cronies for Ralph and Danny. As they were, they had been a couple since the beginning of time. All they had to do was to admire and support the star couple, which they did with total dedication. They were a little cute, but not enough to distract attention from where it really needed to be. And then there was me, the eternal bachelor, the one everyone was trying to convince not to feel like an eternal outsider. Truth be told, everyone felt sorry for me. I just needed to get away. Away from feeling unwanted, tolerated. Away from the unbearably happy couples, especially Mr. and Mrs. Perfect 10. I just couldn't bear to watch them fall in love anymore. The perfect smiles, the cute nicknames, the loving looks. It was as if I was trapped in a sapphic romance novel all day long. And I knew they liked me for some reason and wanted me to be as good as I could be. They regularly tried to set me up with girls they knew. They assured me that they didn't understand why a good-looking guy like me hadn't been figured out a long time ago. It was beyond me. I walked out of the hotel through the front door and greeted the indifferent chaos of the unfamiliar city around me. No one cared about me. No one cared, felt sorry for me, or offered sound advice. It was like a breath of fresh air. I've always been introspective and a little dreamy. The anonymity was exactly what I needed. I stood in front of the hotel and for a few minutes just watched the traffic. The city was brightly lit and lively. It seemed like everyone was in a hurry to get somewhere, and me on this busy sidewalk seemed to be in everyone's way. Feeling unwanted again, I drifted along, trying to find a quieter place where I could just be. Finally, I found a darker and less busy side street. As I explored the less beaten paths, I tried not to think about what the others were doing after they had dispersed to their rooms. I paid absolutely no attention to where I was going. Ralph usually kept an eye on me and kept me out of trouble, but he was still at the hotel and probably taking care of Danny. I couldn't stop myself from imagining them doing it. Those thoughts distracted me for a while, until I came back to reality. Damn, things weren't looking good. Not good at all. I was truly lost in this unfamiliar city. The whole trip had turned out to be a disaster, as I knew it would, but that was just icing on the cake. I should have bought myself a t-shirt with a huge number, 5 inches on it, because that's exactly what I was. The eternal fifth wheel. I guessed that I would end up being buried as the fifth corpse squeezed into a 4-man grave. I realized it was partly my own choice, but that didn't mean I liked it. I imagined them all giggling when I wasn't around. They were probably asking themselves what was wrong with me. If at 23 I was still a virgin, what was my problem? Nevertheless, in my presence, everyone was usually discreet enough not to mention it. They still invited me on their trips, and I just disappeared when they needed privacy. The whole trick was to act like it didn't bother me. But I had no choice in the matter. I had always accompanied them, and I wasn't going to change a thing. I would never take a girlfriend with me, mainly because I don't have one. Never have, and probably never will. I was perpetually the lonely guy in the group. In horror movies, I'd be the weird loner who gets killed first. It sucked. Right before I left, those damn inviting smiles, those knowing looks reappeared. It meant they needed to get rid of me for a while, hoping I'd understand. Of course, I behaved as usual, ignoring their stares and patting them on the shoulder as they hurriedly retreated to their rooms. What looked like a normal evening with good friends at a classy bar suddenly turned into a miserable guy sitting all alone, holding his glass for comfort. I tried to act calm, like I was enjoying my gourmet drink, and hoped people weren't looking at me in pity. That pity was the worst part of this shitty situation. It was then that I needed to leave the hotel immediately. I was fine at first, feeling free and anonymous, until suddenly I felt lost. I didn't have the slightest idea of the neighborhood. Ralph was there quite often, so he suggested the place. The same Ralph who was currently enjoying Danny. Ralph, Mr. Perfect, Mr. Everybody's favorite. Your car broke down in the middle of the night? Call Ralph. Need a kidney? Ask for Ralph. A guy you can count on. Everyone's best friend. He wasn't exceptionally tall. A lot of guys, including me, were taller and more muscular. No, he was definitely fragile. He had chiseled facial features, almost femininely beautiful. He was always smiling, always charming. Women immediately wanted to take care of him, to please him, to get his approval, his attention, to get even one look at him. It was sickening to watch. I kept thinking about our little group as I walked, still not realizing where I was. This neighborhood seemed even darker, poorer, and less busy, which was fine with me. I wanted to be alone anyway, and the darkness suited my mood. I thought about Danny, as I often did. She was the glue that held us together. Everyone loved Danny. There was just no reason not to love her. The difference was that while I'd always suspected that Ralph's perfect behavior was a conscious decision and required some effort on his part, for Danny, being nice just came naturally. A slight noise from behind brought me back to reality. Where the hell was I? This neighborhood wasn't just less busy, it was completely deserted. I looked around, trying not to panic, and saw two shadows following me down the sidewalk. No reason to worry, I thought. In the city, this is to be expected. The dark clothing and hooded faces wouldn't have caused me such concern if two completely identical shadows hadn't loomed in front of me. Sighing, I realized there was no way out, and all I had to do was wait and see if my paranoia would be justified. Need help? One of them started the conversation. I wondered if he used the same phrase every time. No, thanks. How about you? I replied, trying to sound cooler than I felt. Yeah, now that you mention it. We seem to be a little short on money. Ha, what a coincidence. Me too. I wondered why they were even talking to me in the first place. That's funny, man. Tell you what, give us your money and save your life. How's that sound? I had to admit the deal sounded tempting. It's a generous offer. I hate to disappoint you, but I really don't have much, was all I had time to say before I was interrupted by a voice behind me, too light to be taken as a threat. It was a voice I was very familiar with. How the hell did he always manage to do that? Just leave him alone and I probably won't hurt you, he said calmly. It was Ralph, of course. Ralph, the pretty boy. Ralph, who was constantly underestimated by strangers. Ralph, who I was sure was looking forward to this. The boys looked at each other in disbelief, but then laughed. Who would you be? Shouldn't you be home with your mommy? Guy chuckled. How are you going to tell your mommy that the bad guys took your money, boy? Ralph stood with a lost and fragile look, shoving his hands in his pockets. It was too dark to tell whether his eye was ticking or his neck was reddening. Leave my mom out of this. Even without her, I'm your worst nightmare. Two of them started to move toward him, but hesitated for a second. Despite his non-threatening appearance, the statement was too bold to ignore. Look, I've enjoyed our conversation so much that I want to do you a favor. It's not going to end well for you, I added. I didn't really want to warn them. I just wanted to avoid a fight. Ralph was a vicious bastard when he was in a fighting state, but 4 thugs was a lot even for him. Is he some kind of black belt? The smirk in his voice was obvious. No. I wanted to add, he's a sadist, but I didn't. Worse, was all I said. I mentally shrugged. There was no avoiding it now. Take him, boys. I'll take care of it, the interlocutor said, pointing at me. They complied with his order, flanking Ralph, and I wished he'd at least take his hands out of his pockets. It was just plain insolent. I was interrupted, pushed against the wall, and tried to steady myself. I knew if I fell, I'd be dead meat. I may have been the biggest guy at this little event, but I wasn't a trained fighter. Ralph was, though, and while my dance partner and I were figuring out how best to start a fight, we were distracted by a nasty sound, like a bone breaking, followed by a painful howl. What the hell? My self-appointed minder said, briefly turning his attention back to them. I didn't bother, as I could imagine what was going on in there. Instead, I took the opportunity to punch him in the face. I hoped it would hurt him. I even hoped it would hurt him more than it hurt me. The pain in my arm was intense, and I briefly wondered how guys in old movies could do this for hours and still look fresh out of the barber shop. My movement at least got my attacker's attention again, and I took the opportunity to hit him with my other, still good arm. This time, the blow was less painful and had a greater effect on him. He stumbled back, and I thought my first training as an adult fighter had been a success. After a few hundred fights like this, I might actually be able to hurt someone. There was another vicious cracking sound from behind the talking man, and this time we both looked over. 2 of the attackers were lying down, but the third seemed to be quickly on his feet. Ralph and guy number 3 were circling each other, and Ralph had this look on his face. The look I hated. The look I knew so well. The look we'd all learned to fear since we were kids. He was my best friend in the world, but in situations like this, he was nothing short of the devil. In that gaze was gathered everything bad about humanity, everything that is revealed when the thin shell of civilization is stripped away. He was a predator on the hunt and derived immense pleasure from it. My companion looked a little concerned, but before I could deliver another symbolic blow, he struck out of nowhere. It wasn't symbolic. I didn't see it, but I definitely felt it. I also felt the wall help him by hitting me in the back of the head. This shit has got to stop, he commented, pulling a long, vicious-looking knife out of nowhere. Sorry, kid. I've never had to do this before, he added. Unlike Ralph, he didn't seem to enjoy his work and seemed genuinely sorry it had come to this. His head suddenly snapped to the side as Ralph delivered a kick with his foot. I looked behind his back and saw 3 figures on the ground. Ralph took the knife from him and dropped it into the gutter. You need to stop doing that, my friend, Ralph said jokingly, though I was sure I had never done anything like that. I wished his voice didn't sound so damn impassive. Thanks, friend, I replied, trying to hide how much it shook me. You saved my life. I know. That's what friends are for. You're my friend, you know? My best friend in the whole world. Just don't ever forget that. Right? I know, I replied, but I didn't feel it. The predatory face was still there, about to be hidden by the mask he usually hid behind to pass himself off as human. His features had softened, but his eyes were still cold and hard. You know, Andy, I love you. Honestly, I love you completely. You're my only real friend in the world. I'm just afraid that one day I'm going to have to kill you if you keep doing stuff like this. I had no idea if it was a joke or not. I didn't even know what he meant by doing shit. Wandering the dark alleys? He laughed like it was the best joke in the world, but I was puzzled. What the hell was wrong with him? It was a question I had asked myself many times. Unfortunately, I was one of the few who had seen the true Ralph. The sight was not a pleasant one, and it was getting worse. Dazed, I followed him past the still groaning group of attackers. The way back to the hotel was more difficult than I remembered, and I wondered how Ralph had found me. Had he followed me somehow? Why? It was scarier than being mugged. Without him, I'd only lose a few bucks. As it was, he helped create a life-threatening situation in which he had to rescue me. And yet, without a doubt, he saved my life. How did he know where I was? How did he know I was in trouble? He was supposed to be in bed with Danny. I was just about to ask him that when he silenced me with a tight hug. Next chapter. When Ralph showed up on my doorstep, there was no planning or preparation. It was just the way it was. No meaningful discussion, just two dudes hanging out. Two rotten pizzas, a few unhealthy drinks, and a PlayStation. I briefly wondered if Danny was busy and wanted to get rid of Ralph, but really the day was going great. As always, I kicked his ass at all the sports games, and he didn't seem to mind. More than that, he seemed genuinely happy for me. We played, fought, and argued to the point of exhaustion. I need to do something about Danny, he said suddenly. While there was technically no prohibition against dealing with serious issues, it rarely happened. What's wrong with you? You always seem so happy. I was still half focused on the game. I don't know. She seems so, I don't know, aloof, somehow, lately. Okay, what did you mess up? I asked, not really thinking about whether I really wanted to know. What? He snorted. Why me? Oh, come on. Danny is Danny. We all know she never messes anything up. And you're the relationship expert, aren't you? Ouch, that hurt. I'd rather not mention my most obvious weakness. Okay, so what's the plan? I replied, ignoring his teasing. Do you need to come up with something for her? Take care of her? Cook a nice dinner for her? Give her a foot massage? Buy her a nice gift? Take her on an unexpected trip? A gift? That's a great idea, man. Come on, let's buy it. I'm going to need your advice. Yep, advice from a relationship expert, I thought bitterly, but kept silent. Ralph's introspective mood was suddenly gone, replaced by an almost manic activity. I shook my head, realizing that the stores were about to close and that whatever he'd done wrong to annoy Danny, it probably couldn't be fixed. She just wasn't like that. She wasn't interested in material things. After a few minutes, he picked out a store where he could spend a moderate amount of money. The problem was that the store was already dark, which wasn't surprising since it was after closing time. Unfortunately for her, the young saleswoman was just about to close. Excuse me, could you wait a moment, please? She looked around, her face clearly saying, "No chance, buddy," until she looked at Ralph more closely. Ralph smiled his fancy catalog smile, and I knew she was done for. I had seen this before and knew exactly what was going on. She was a young girl of average looks, with average insecurity. Ralph wasn't average at all, and he certainly wasn't insecure. He knew the power he had over some women, and he enjoyed using it. If a woman had a weakness, he saw it and used it to his advantage. She looked at him like a deer in the headlights. His wide smile seemed so genuine. His teeth were whiter than the law allowed. His eyes were so mesmerizingly blue. Carefully styled hair, tanned skin, facial features like a model. She'd never been intimate with such an attractive man, and he would get his way. We all knew it. Please, you have to help me. I'm begging you. The problem was, he didn't look like he was begging. It sounded suspiciously like he was just telling her what to do. Not wanting to take her eyes off him, she just nodded, trying to unlock the door without looking at him. She finally succeeded, and we found ourselves inside the store, which was once again brightly lit. She moved as if she needed to use the restroom, but I knew she was just in a hurry to get home. We were distracting her from something very important. That much was obvious. Ralph knew it as well as I did, but he liked it, and I didn't. Come on, Ralph, hurry up. I'm going to kick your ass in the game. Relax, man. We've got all the time in the world, right? He added, looking at the salesgirl, enjoying his power over her. She only nodded, looking conflicted but powerless. I began to suspect that he was doing this purely for my benefit. It was a demonstration of his power over women, and for some reason he was doing it to impress me while the poor girl had to pay for it. He may have been genuinely concerned about Danny, but she had nothing to do with it. Not anymore. I'd had enough. Okay, I'm sure you can manage without me. I'm going home. You can join me when you're ready. And she didn't notice any of this and seemed to still be busy being surprised. However, his smug expression suddenly disappeared. He looked around as if expecting her to help him. Come on, Andy. I need you here. His arrogant confidence crumbled like a thin facade, and even his spell cast on the poor girl seemed to weaken as she dared to glance at her wristwatch. See ya, I said as I walked out of the damn store, angry at myself, at Ralph, and at the whole shitty situation. I thought it was just a casual night out with a friend. It was a nice surprise, since we hadn't had many of those lately. But instead it turned out that he was just using me like he used that poor girl, just so I could see this demonstration of, what? His power over women? His power over other people, including me? That he was more attractive than me? I was painfully aware of that fact, and I always had been. That certainty was the bane of my youth. Shit. Thankfully, he didn't come back to my house. Next chapter. Theoretically, it was possible to take turns hosting our gatherings, following an unfathomable schedule that Danny, Maria, and Lisa controlled. For some reason, we always ended up in my garden in the summer, which suited me just fine. I was the only one with a house, which meant I was the only one with a private outdoor pool. I suppose not being in a relationship gave me a couple of advantages. I could focus my time and energy on my career. I had just invested in a new grill, which, as it was absurdly large even for such occasions. Once the other men showed up, control of the thing somehow faded away on its own. Everyone agreed that I wasn't as qualified as all these barbecue PhDs and should concentrate on serving drinks. With a laugh, I removed myself and joined the ladies. As has become the norm lately, any group of women, including Danny, were talking in low tones with concerned faces. As usual, things changed as soon as a man came within hearing range. So, when are we going to meet Miss Andy? Asked Lisa, clearly trying to change the topic of conversation and unmistakably finding a sore spot. I could see Danny and Maria crinkle her nose. The only solution was a joke. Why? Are you interested? It's tempting. There's just one small detail. You have to kill Tom first. Tom was the gentlest person imaginable, but at 2 meters and 5 centimeters tall, he wouldn't even notice me trying to kill him. Tom, looks like I'm going to have to kill you, I shouted in his direction. Nothing personal. He only nodded absent-mindedly, giving me a thumbs up while he discussed something with Paul. Wait, Danny played along. Poor Tom hasn't done anything to deserve this. If our eternal bachelor has to pursue someone, it should be me. With those words, she theatrically clasped her hand to her chest and grabbed my arm with the other. Now we were all laughing hysterically. Danny was as unattainable as the Queen of England, only much more attractive. Suddenly, Danny's sweet face was replaced by an expression of horror, and I found myself flying away from her, obediently following Newton's laws, and landing on my back. What the hell had just happened? I looked up at Ralph's face contorted with rage. Stay away from my woman, asshole. Do you hear me? Ralph? I tried to calm him down by keeping my ass on the ground. Looking around, I saw open mouths all around. Shut up, okay? Don't make it worse. We all know what's going on here. I replied slyly. What are you talking about, Ralph? Asked Lisa behind his back, clearly puzzled. He knows, he stated, waving his perfectly manicured finger uncertainly in my direction. And she knows, he added, turning to his wife. Oh, come on. Calm down, Paul tried, putting his hand on Ralph's shoulder. Ralph allowed him to do so, but ignored him completely. I'm not blind or stupid, okay? He added as I contemplated how to change my current undignified position. I looked around, trying to see if anyone realized what he was talking about. Ralph's neck lost its dangerous red color, and he threw his hands up in frustration. Finally, he took Danny's hand and literally dragged her away from the group and into my house. As we stood in embarrassed silence, Ralph could be heard yelling at poor Danny from inside, but the words were indistinguishable. There didn't seem to be enough gaps in his lecture for Danny to get a word in. I didn't envy her having to endure this and briefly considered going inside to help her. Just as I was about to enter, I felt Paul's hand on my shoulder. "Stay. I don't think this is going to help." I nodded, just as an exhausted Danny reappeared. I could swear she looked a little guilty, like she was partially responsible for this fiasco, which seemed absurd. She hadn't done anything wrong. I pondered whether I should talk to her and assure her that nothing was wrong, but decided to stay away from her for the evening. Too bad, talking to her had always been the highlight of these meetings for me. After a while, the mood lightened a bit, and we started talking about more important things like sports and the weather. After a few minutes, I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned around. Ralph was standing there, holding a plate with a burger and a few other tasty dishes. The plate was too neatly arranged for him to do so. Danny had sent it to me as a peace offering. "Sorry, dude, are we okay?" I appreciated an honest male apology. Besides, I didn't like conflict and wasn't one to hold a grudge forever. We all knew Ralph had a temper and a tendency to overreact. It was no big deal. "We're fine." We shook hands, surrounded by relieved faces. Still, something was going on in the background, and it wasn't going to go away that easily. Ralph could go crazy, and there was nothing we could do about it. A few days later, I was headed to the store to replenish my supplies, which were still pretty depleted from the barbecue meeting, when I ran into Maria. One look at her told me that she was in female anxiety mode. She had obviously cried at some point and seemed to be barely holding herself together. She was obviously on some kind of mission and was going to hang on to the breakdown until everything was done. I immediately did what I would expect any man to do in this situation and put my arms around her. "What's going on, Maria? You look terribly upset." "Andy, this is just awful. I still can't believe it. No one could have thought this was possible." I just wanted her to finally get to the point. "Ralph hit Danny last night. I guess it wasn't the first time. She just never told anyone before. Can you believe it? Our Ralph. The sweetest guy in the world." I had a slightly different opinion of our Jekyll and Hyde hybrid, but I decided to keep it to myself. Women tended to have a very biased opinion of our golden boy. "Unbelievable," I said, though I had no trouble believing it. "Why did she choose to tell you about it this particular time?" She looked at me like I was the biggest idiot in the world. "Andy, you can be pretty stupid. Did you see her eye? It's hard not to." "Maria, I haven't even seen her since we all met in my garden. How would I know?" That detail didn't impress her. I could almost hear her thinking, "Men?" "Her eye was completely black, Andy." She was still looking at me, wondering how I could have failed to notice it. She tried to cover it up, but it didn't help at all. Then she had bruises all over her body. "Shit," I said, hesitating to say anything. "Would you believe she was ashamed of it? Like it was her fault." "Unbelievable." "That sucks," seemed the safe answer. "Right. When she couldn't keep it from us anymore, she started defending it." I only nodded. "I mean, Ralph. He's great." What's that got to do with it, I thought. Women always saw only the best in Ralph and didn't notice his ugly sides, simply because he was so damn handsome. They all wore rose-colored glasses when it came to Mr. Perfect. I had to put up with that my whole childhood. Was something broken? None of the adults even thought to suspect him. He just stood there, smiling and handsome, hiding the maniac inside. "We're all busy helping her right now. We've all decided it's best for you to stay away." "I'm sorry. I know how it is. Please understand." "What? What the hell am I even doing here?" That was painful. Danny was one of my best friends. Why was I suddenly refusing to help her in her time of need? "So what's going on now, Maria? Is there nothing I can do?" No, you have to stay away, do you hear me? This was accompanied by a stern look on my face, as if I was the one who had hit Danny. The problem was, I was pretty sure I hadn't. What did I do wrong? Come on. Seriously, Andy? Anyway, she's moving out, at least for a few days. She's staying with me and Paul until she realizes what she wants. Okay. Well, just let me know if there's anything I can do. Without another word, but throwing me another puzzled and stern look, Maria just left me standing there, still perplexed. Next chapter. Danny, you need to leave Ralph. Moving back in and forgiving him was a mistake. One day he will destroy you or someone else, Maria pleaded. Not exactly what you expect to hear at a typical barbecue party, but certainly true. I knew the topic had come up before and would come up again. This time, they didn't mind that I and the other guys were eavesdropping on them since it was already common knowledge. Ralph was the best friend anyone could have, but at the same time, he was a freaking time bomb. All of our friends started to let their guard down when it came to him. No one knew what to do with Danny. Banning him from being friends was impossible after what he'd done for each of us. Just stop, okay? I know what I'm doing. Stop pressuring me, Maria. I'm his wife and I'm going to stay with him for better or worse. Okay? Do you understand? He needs me now, and it's my fault. Among her other virtues, Danny was loyal to the core. The whole thing sucked. Ralph had helped each of us on numerous occasions. He just did it. That's just the way he was. He never asked for anything in return. All we could offer him was loyalty. It didn't seem like much, but it was actually a lot, especially in a situation like this. Maria only raised her hands reassuringly. We just want to help, okay? Danny's burden was certainly the heaviest. No one could doubt that she loved him. From the beginning, it seemed like they were made for each other. They were always the most popular, the most attractive, and the cutest in the neighborhood. Many people lusted after them, but everyone knew it was hopeless. None of us were around when it happened, but it seemed to us that they were born together and would remain so until they died in each other's arms. As much as it seemed like they were made for each other, their biographies were very different. Danny came from an upper-class family where she was safe and protected. To call Ralph's house a wreck would be like calling the Atlantic Ocean slightly humid. His mother had fled the scene at some point. She must have done it pretty early on, since we couldn't even remember her. His father was a very sweet man and clearly loved his son, but he had an extreme temper. I know you're trying to help, but I have to handle this on my own, okay? For better or worse, I said. I'm not the type to run away when things get tough. You should know that. We all know that, I thought, as I watched them emotionally embrace, their brief spat already forgotten. Despite Danny's clear statement, it was our business whether we wanted it to be or not. It was impossible not to watch their ongoing and ever-escalating drama. I'm so sorry, Maria. This is so hard. I know, Maria replied, snorting as hard as Danny did. Anyway, what happened this time? Pete brought me a burger. Danny, Pete brought everyone something to eat. That's how it always started. Someone was doing something nice for Danny. Someone was talking to Danny. Someone was just looking at Danny. You can't keep this up, Danny, I said, cutting into their conversation. It keeps getting worse, and sooner or later someone's going to get hurt. No. Stop bugging me, please. I'm having a hard enough time as it is. I can't leave him. He can't survive without me. He's my man, and I'll be there for him even when times get tough. The problem was that times had been hard for quite some time. Their problems had been escalating for almost a year. Why are you staying? I finally asked Maria after Danny had gone to fix her makeup. For the same reason you are, to keep an eye on Danny. It's not just Danny. You know, I really like Ralph. I mean the real Ralph. I can't even remember a time when we weren't friends. Really? Andy, is Honey the real Ralph? Has he ever been your friend? Do you really like him? Come on. Remember how he helped me when I ditched Dad's car in the middle of the night? When he took the blame when Mrs. Parker wanted to kick me out of school? When— I know, she interrupted me. But are you sure that's who he is? A nice guy who helps everyone, just loses his mind sometimes and relies on everyone's understanding? What do you mean? Have you ever considered that it could be the other way around? How unlikely is it that his sweet personality just leaves the stage to come back later? That he might be enjoying these fits of rage, that they are his true nature? That he can use us to cover his ass by forcing himself on us by being nice most of the time? Do you think— I don't know, I honestly don't. But I know why I'm staying, and it's definitely not for Ralph. Danny. Danny and you. What? I'm not the one you need to worry about. For some reason, she looked like she didn't believe me. While you and Danny can't get away from Ralph, Paul and I have to stay. You and her are our true friends, and we won't leave you alone while you roll into the abyss following Ralph. She suddenly took my hands in hers and looked at me with compassion. Andy, Danny may be doomed. We have to get used to that thought. But you, my friend, you may have to let go. Before she could continue and I could think of anything useful to say, Danny returned, and Maria left me alone to ponder everything and surreptitiously study Danny's fresh, unsuccessfully smeared bruises. I remembered the day Ralph had helped me fight the evil Ostrowski twins. They had once again ambushed me after school and started beating the crap out of me. I had always been a big guy, though I used my muscles for sports, not fighting. The twins were 2 years older than me and were evil bastards. They loved to fight and wore their battle scars proudly, always looking to add more. At some point during the fight, we all turned and looked in the same direction, feeling something evil watching us in a way only kids do. Ralph just stood there with his arms relaxed at his sides. Compared to us, he was a small, frail boy, thin to the point where people felt the need to spontaneously feed him. More importantly, his face was too handsome to engage in a fistfight. Nevertheless, we all knew the Ostrovskys were in trouble. Ralph had an eerily calm look on his face, as if he was in some private area. I noticed a slightly red throat and a ticking eyelid. This was going to end badly, and I didn't think it was worth it, but that was never a problem for Ralph. Come on, Ralphie, we were just playing, one of them tried. Bad move, I thought. He hated being called Ralphie. Ralph just calmly started walking toward us. The twins raised their hands placatingly. They had gotten their asses kicked by him before and didn't want to repeat, but that's what happened. I tried to help him in any way I could, but it was more of a symbolic action, and some part of me felt the urge to protect the twins. As usual, Ralph knew no mercy. Not for his enemies, not for himself. He fought without any sense of safety or justice. He tried to inflict maximum damage, whether it was appropriate or not. He didn't care in the slightest that he himself might be injured. I always wondered how long he could keep up that appearance, but he always remained virtually unharmed. A few minutes later, the twins were on the ground, and my task shifted to trying to help them rather than stop the process. Ralph was still in the zone and could destroy them if no one stopped him. I took him in my arms, talking to him, trying to look into his eyes until he finally returned to our world. Next chapter. What the hell was that? I was standing in a busy airport trying to find my damn luggage when I noticed I was naked, and everyone started noticing and looking at me. Terrified, I looked around trying to find some clothes to cover my nakedness. And then there was the doorbell. It kept ringing until the airport disappeared, and I woke up fully, but still a little confused. 3 o'clock in the morning. What the hell? This had to be important. Somehow I already knew I was going to regret later that it wasn't important. Stumbling up the familiar stairs, I made my way to the front door. Danny. She was just standing there, wet from the pouring rain, and there was blood on her once white shirt. Damn, this looked really bad. I swung the door open and dragged her inside into the damn rain. She looked strangely detached and passive, like a rag doll. Not knowing what else to do, I sat her down on a kitchen chair and examined her for wounds. "It's his blood," she said languidly, having read my mind. "Did Mr. Hyde come out again?" "Yes." At this point, she was interrupted by a bout of crying, and I patiently just held her until it was over. "We ordered pizza." "Come on," I began incredulously. "He didn't suspect." "He suspected." I smiled at the pizza delivery guy. "No way." "It can't be. I'm 23 after all. I know I'm not ugly." "Danny, this is getting out of hand. It's not jealousy anymore, it's crazy." "I don't know. Not directly. I have no idea. It was probably about me being too friendly with men, encouraging them, looking for a replacement for him. Something like that." "That's ridiculous." "I know, but there's nothing he can do about it. He's just afraid of losing me. And for nothing. I'm his." I sighed. I hated hearing that last sentence. "What happened?" "Andy, we had a fight. An unpleasant one. I was sick of his shit. Then it started. You know the one. The red throat. The ticking eyelid." "Oh yeah, I knew all those Ralph sayings. We all knew them by heart. Things got bad when he felt betrayed or someone was getting too close to Danny or his friends. As soon as his neck turned red and his eye ticked, we all ran away from the scene as fast as we could as kids. Except for Danny. Danny always stayed." "Yeah, I know," I replied, coming back to the present. "What now, Danny? As much as it pains me to say this, you have to leave him for good." "No, I can't. You don't understand. And you never have." "Huh?" There were those pesky hints again that no one wanted to clear up. It was lame. "What are you talking about?" "I'm sorry, Andy. You're a good guy. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm tired, though. Can I use your guest room?" "Sure, go ahead. You know the way." She often slept in the guest bedroom downstairs, though she never slept without Ralph. I shrugged, hugged her, and went upstairs to my own room, hoping the damned airport dream wouldn't come back. Seconds after my ear touched the pillow, I was rudely awakened by some kind of pounding. The clock showed that 2 hours had passed, which explained my confused state. I staggered toward the stairs again, trying to figure out what was going on. This was becoming a bad habit. I was greeted by a rather unexpected sight. The front door had been kicked in. Slightly less unexpected was the appearance of Ralph behind it. "Why didn't you just knock?" I managed to ask before I noticed the contortion on his face. Ralph looked like a caricature of his beautiful, model-like face. He looked completely insane, dirty, and most importantly, angry. He looked like some supermodel from hell. Another nice touch was the tire iron he was holding. I didn't know why, since I didn't have a single tire in my house. "Ralph," I blithely remarked, in case he couldn't remember his name. "You," he replied just as deftly, in case I'd forgotten I was me. "Where is she?" "Danny?" Who else, I thought. We're not going to win the prize for the smartest conversation ever. I came down the stairs just as Danny came out of the guest bedroom. I had time to notice the look of horror and shame on her beautiful face. With each passing second, Ralph seemed to deflate. Danny and I obviously spent our nights in different rooms and even on different floors. How could this even be a problem for him? There had never been even a hint of anything inappropriate between us. "Danny!" He suddenly spoke in a very boyish way, like a little boy in need of help. Danny immediately softened. Hell, he could still manipulate her at will. After hugging him for a while, she came over to me and hugged me too. "I need to go with him. He's too fragile. He won't make it without my help. Think about what happened before and what you want in the end," I told her quietly as she followed him. I thought she nodded, but it was probably just wishful thinking for reality. For the first time since we were kids, I hadn't seen any of my friends for weeks. I wasn't sure if they had seen each other. I knew I didn't want to see any of them. But the most unpleasant was Maria's message. "Asked you to stay away. Damn, I'm so mad at you." That really upset me. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just supporting everyone as best I could. Maria was going to ruin our friendship with her thinly veiled insinuations, her refusal to tell me what was going on, her accusations. They clearly thought I was part of the problem, though I couldn't understand why, so I did what grown men do best. I sulked. The separation did me good. The black cloud in the background began to dissipate. I was tired of being accused of causing problems for other people. I started thinking about Danny much less often, only 10 or 20 times a day. At one point, I even became so detached from everything that I started noticing other women. I still wasn't ready to date anyone, but it was already progress. It was like I was going through a divorce, with all my friends, but mostly Danny. And then everything turned to shit again. I was quietly spending the evening watching pointless crap on Netflix when my phone rang. Absent-mindedly, I took the call without even glancing at the caller ID. "Andy!" someone sobbed, and the fact that it was Danny's voice made me immediately go on full alert. "Danny, what's wrong? Can you come over? Please." I decided that staying away from them was the best thing for me at that moment, and here it was. "I'm on my way." Damn, this had to be serious. Danny rarely asked for help, and the fact that she was crying wasn't a good sign. I jumped in the car and tried to deal with the panic. I considered calling the police, but I had no idea what to tell them. A crying woman in the evening was no reason for a SWAT team. I hurried to their apartment to catch the concerned neighbors gathered at the open front door. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my cool, even though I still had no idea what was going on. "I'll take care of it." No one believed me, including myself, but they left anyway. The living room was a mess, but none of my friends were there. Ralph was sitting on their bed, crying and not noticing me. Not wanting to alarm him, I quietly left. The door to the bathroom was damaged, but still locked. I knocked gently and called out to Danny through a crack that shouldn't have been there, trying not to alert Ralph. "You!" I heard him yell behind me. He didn't look good at all. His face was as dirty as his living room. Red, swollen, desperate, but with no visible wounds. "Ralph," I began as soothingly as possible. "Danny called me, said she needed help. I came over immediately. Is there anything?" "You, of all the assholes? Are you here to help?" "What? Why? What's wrong with me?" "What's wrong with you? There's nothing wrong with you. You stabbed me in the back after all I've done for you. I saved your life. Have you forgotten that? I was the best friend anyone could ask for. Is this how you repay me?" "What? What did I do?" "What?" he simply shouted without further explanation. "Calm down, Ralph," I heard from behind me. "I called him." "Danny, I'm not kidding. You know what's going to happen." "I've gotten to the point where I don't care," she replied, surprisingly calmly. I quickly glanced at her. To my immense relief, she looked dirty, tired, probably bruised, but not seriously injured. "I swear I'll kill someone if you leave me." It shook me to the core. This was too serious. "Can someone explain to me what's going on?" I looked around, finding no answers on either face. What the hell was going on? Everyone assumed I knew what was going on, but no one wanted to tell me. "Okay, what now?" "Danny, you can't stay here. It's not safe," I tried to reason, ignoring Ralph, the elephant in the room. "I'm surprised no one called the police, and no one was seriously hurt." Danny pointed to the huge bruises on her forearm that I hadn't noticed. "See? That's what happens," Ralph stated, before suddenly disappearing into the depths of their apartment. "Okay, Danny, this is it. It's time for you to go." "Andy, you know I can't do that. Ralph will hurt someone. You hurt him. I can't let that happen." I wondered who she thought might be killed and assumed Ralph was talking about suicide. "That's blackmail. Does he really need to stoop so low?" "Well, Andy, we can hardly judge him, can we?" What the hell did she mean by that? Before I could ask, Ralph was back, and he had clearly gained momentum again. His neck was slightly red, but at least his eye wasn't ticking. What the hell are you still doing here, asshole? He didn't exactly shout, but the neighbors could undoubtedly hear every word. Hey, I'm your friend, I started before he interrupted me. Friend? My friend? Really? I didn't just hear him. I felt like I was standing in a wind tunnel. I hate you. I always have. Let's be honest, okay? It's all been a sham for years. I'm fed up with it. Do you hear me? What? Was my brilliant reply. I had no idea what he was talking about and assumed he didn't mean anything serious. You always wanted her, asshole. You know, I don't care. Most guys want her. It drives me crazy, but I don't care anymore. He looked confused at this point, and a confused and angry Ralph was very intimidating. But you, he shouted, turning and pointing at Danny, you're the one who's killing me. Ralph, calm down, please. You're making this up. I tried. Andy, Danny interrupted me, sounding calm and sad. He's right. Let's be honest for once, okay? He's right. This dishonesty is killing us all. Right, he added, in my opinion, completely unnecessarily, as I still wasn't sure what they meant to say. Okay, I finally said, mostly buying time. So, I've always liked Danny. I'll admit it. I mean, who doesn't? Liked? Are you kidding me, asshole? You've had a huge I love Danny sign on your forehead since you were a kid. Do you really think no one saw that? To be honest, yeah. I thought, shit, the cat was out of the bag. Andy, Danny said very softly, everyone knew. You think I was like that for no reason, you idiot? An angry, jealous asshole that even I despise? I always knew you wanted her. I always knew I'd eventually lose her to you, and I always knew someone would die if that happened. What, are you crazy, man? I replied, already knowing the answer. Yeah, he grinned bitterly. Yeah, I am. And you know what? It's because of you. It's not just you, asshole. I can survive another loser trying to get my woman. But Danny... She looked at me like she was embarrassed and shrugged. Danny? I asked. Some of what he says is true. I've always been Ralph's girl. There's never been any doubt about that. But I've always liked you. Very much. She blushed slightly, which was as cute as it was inappropriate given the situation. See? He shrieked. You've never been able to hide it. I always knew what was going on. Why do you think I pretended to be your friend? Hell, I never even liked you. They say keep your enemies close. What? I still couldn't accept that he was being serious. Andy, think about it, Danny interjected. Have you ever really liked Ralph? Well, damn it. I wanted things to finally be out in the open, but maybe not this much. Truth time, she added as they both waited for my reaction. Well, I'll admit that I mostly stayed by his side because of you. But why did he save my life back then, on that dark alley? What do you think, asshole? I followed you that night, and I still do from time to time. When I saw where you were, it was perfect. Saving you would have kept you from trying to steal Danny, if you had any style. But of course, you don't have any. Hey, I never tried to steal her. Really? Let's be honest, you don't like me. Say it and I can live with it. Why do you stick around? Why haven't you ever had a girlfriend? Because you want her, and only her. You love her, and only her. You love her enough to stay and suffer in silence, enough to live like a monk, enough to watch me get what you want. Confused, I could only nod. Danny added fuel to the fire, flaring brightly at that moment. Ralph shrieked. As his gaze ticked away, he grabbed a huge kitchen knife and looked at it like he was confused. I figured he didn't know who to kill with that knife, Danny, me, or himself. Danny, meanwhile, moved toward me, obviously trying to protect me and not seeing herself on his list of potential victims. Before I could warn her, he indefinitely threw the knife in our direction. Contrary to what you see in the movies, throwing a kitchen knife is not easy. Ralph had no skill. All he had was anger. The knife hit the wall harmlessly, handle first. All three of us were stunned. Ralph stared at his hands, disbelieving. Shit, he said simply, suddenly appearing close to tears. Danny boldly walked over to him and gently stroked his cheek. Ralph, I'm so sorry about the way things turned out. It's not fair. It was never fair for either of us. Ralph, I have to leave anyway. This has gone too far. He threw his head up. It seemed absurd, but he was actually surprised by her words. Yes, of course you do. Leave with him. I always knew you were cheating on me with him. It was always Andy, Andy, Andy. I'm tired of it. But I'll tell you this. If you go out with him now, one of us has to die. I'm not kidding. Me, you, or Andy. It's going to be entirely your fault. Ralph, please get help. This can't go on any longer, she said lovingly. Don't you dare leave with him, he shouted, unable to hold back. No, Ralph, I can't stay. I'm terribly sorry. I'll be back soon. Danny, please don't leave me. It was amazing how quickly he went from rage to tears to pleading. Was it all real, or was he just a brilliant actor? He tried every tactic he could think of and knew no shame. I was an unwilling observer of this undignified scene. I'll be back tomorrow, my love. With those words, she simply beckoned me to leave their apartment with her without touching me, which seemed like a good idea. Of course, we went to my apartment. Without a word, she disappeared into the guest bedroom, which I now considered my room, refusing my unspoken offer to listen to her if she wanted to talk. Of course, I couldn't sleep for a second. To my great surprise, a few hours later, I heard my bedroom door open. Do you mind? She asked softly. Just hold me. It wasn't just a tempting offer. It was the first step towards something I dreamed of my whole life. Even if it was just a night, it was worth it all. Yes, we had confirmed Ralph's fears, but it looked like we were still on some kind of roller coaster. We had no choice but to wait for it to be over, hopefully not in tears. When I woke up the next morning, she was still sound asleep. I guessed that the previous weeks hadn't gone to waste for her. I couldn't imagine what it was like to live with Ralph. She had her reasons for staying with him, and whether they were justified or not, she was a hero for putting up with it. The smell of the breakfast I'd made might have helped lure her from my bedroom into the kitchen. I tried my best, trying to impress her. The fight for her was wide open, and I would do whatever it took to win. Ooh, that looks really appetizing. I'm starving. Unfortunately, after a good start, the rest of breakfast passed in awkward silence. One of us should have gotten up the courage to openly discuss what we wanted, but it didn't happen. I certainly didn't want to beg her to stay, and I didn't want to coerce her like Ralph did. Of course I hoped she would leave Ralph, but it had to be her own decision. I decided not to mention it. Danny, you really need to leave Ralph. So much for that decision. She didn't say anything back, just looked at me sadly. It's not that easy, Andy. I have to take care of the man I love. I have to make sure he doesn't get hurt. Even if he does hurt himself? I replied, assuming she was talking about Ralph. She looked at me surprised and a little worried. Danny, do you really believe he loves you? What? Well, of course he does. He's freaking out about this whole situation. Okay, time to lay it all out in the open, I decided. Really? You know what? I think he's always been the center of attention and craves it. He needs the power that comes with it. He needs validation. He needs to feel important. What does that have to do with it? Have you ever considered that he's just using you? That he's just using all of us? That we're the stage and audience for his little dramas? She shook her head, but I could see that her faith in Ralph was beginning to waver. I'm not so sure, Andy. It seems like a cop-out. Yes, he likes the attention, but it seems like a cheap way to justify my leaving him. I can't deny the love he has for me. Okay, I replied, shrugging my shoulders and not wanting to get further into this minefield. If what I said was true, and I didn't know that for sure, it would be a blow to her self-esteem. Ralph would never love her, only use her. I understood how flattering it must be for her to be his chosen one, to be the center of attention with him, to see other girls wanting the same things she did. We sipped our coffee in silence. I tried to watch the expression on her face so as not to give myself away, and she was deep in thought. It was a big step for her to even think that all her struggle and suffering for marriage might have been in vain. All she would do would be to serve a purpose in Ralph's scheme. Suddenly, she seemed to come to a decision. I must go home. Of course, I did my best to hide my disappointment. I'd practiced for years. Hiding my true feelings when it came to Danny was something I really excelled at. I see. I wanted to cry, to beg, to scream, to convince her, but I knew it wouldn't help. It would have to be her own decision. If she accepts it, I will fight for her. If not, I would still support her, as I had done for a long time. For two people who'd spent the night in an embrace, the odd, awkward hug and stuttering stereotypes that was our goodbye were a little out of place, but it felt like a wall had come up between us. I felt like I'd played my cards too soon and lost. Don't worry about me, she said goodbye, but that's exactly what I did. As always, I felt the need to protect her, and as always, I never did. The next few days I was very busy, mostly worrying and imagining horrible things. On gray afternoons I would return home, once again reflecting on my shitty life. There was nothing I could do about this shitty situation with Danny and Ralph. That meant I couldn't do anything about the shitty situation with Andy either. I once again considered leaving it all behind and starting over somewhere else. It was a good idea, as long as I managed to ignore the fact that nothing like that would ever happen. Everything would stay the same. We were all securely tied to our roles in this cheap play. Suddenly, I felt a nudge in my back that came out of nowhere. As I stumbled forward, I thought to myself, this wouldn't have mattered when I was a kid. I would have just sat on my ass and watched what happened. But I was an adult, and so I stumbled like an idiot, trying to stave off the inevitable. Eventually, I collided with a lamppost in a most undignified manner before my ass did touch the ground. I looked around, trying to figure out what had happened, and saw Ralph standing there. He was looking at me the same way he always looked at my enemies, which disappointed me a little. I'd been on his side for ages, and I didn't feel like I deserved it. Ralph, I said, mostly to say something. You bastard! You asshole! You ruined everything! What? You, me, Danny. That's what you messed up. It was always just you and Danny. I've always been the odd man out. This was absurd. It was just the opposite, so I responded in the most obvious way possible. What the hell are you talking about? Ralph. It was Danny, sounding unusually stern. Where had she even come from? Ralph seemed just as surprised. His head jerked in her direction. Danny, stay away from me. I'll deal with you later. I didn't like the way that sounded, not at all. We had a deal, Ralph, she called out, pointing her finger at him. What did she mean by that? What kind of deal did they have? Her perfectly manicured finger looked somehow out of place given the potentially violent situation. The nail was painted bright red. I don't care, my dear wife. You've been cheating all along. You broke our deal. Surprising us both, Ralph punched her right in the face. Not very hard, but with a closed fist. This was getting to be too much. I was a peaceful guy, but this was too much. Hitting anyone was wrong, but hitting my Danny was unthinkable. I have no idea if my neck turned red and my eye started ticking, but either way I felt like Mr. Hyde for the first time in my life. I just walked up to him, flaming on the inside, and he just watched me. We both knew what was about to happen. At some point my fist would collide with his face. I did what was necessary, and he did nothing to prevent it. I didn't have much of a clue about the fight, but he did. Yet he just stood there waiting for it to happen. As if in slow motion, I jerked my hand away. His mouth turned into a sudden slight smile. His arms hung limply at his sides. It was unreal. I threw my punch, surprisingly clumsy and ineffective. My fist somehow made contact with his face, but it was nothing to him. A joke. A fly touched his face. He sat down on the ground with a smug expression on his face. See? he said, pointing at me, then at Danny. I knew it from the beginning. I did everything for you, for both of you. I was the best friend and the best husband you could ever have. That's how you repay me. But he didn't look disappointed. The whole scene resembled an amateur drama club rehearsal. I almost expected someone to yell in the background, again, but this time with more emotion. But you'll pay, he continued. Hell, you're going to pay for this. Both of you are nothing more than a whore and a traitor. Yeah, that was all we were. An amateur dramatic group, a handful of actors, a private party, a limited audience. We gave Ralph the stage he needed for his dramas. He never needed us. Anyone who had played the roles he'd written would have done fine. We could have been replaced, though he probably wouldn't have agreed to it. We were just unlucky enough to have fallen into our roles since childhood. Interrupting my musings, Ralph jumped up, suddenly grabbing his knife. Where the hell did he come from? Why did he suddenly have a penchant for using knives? This was something new. He used to like to fight, but he'd never tried to destroy someone. A change like that was frightening. I didn't look at Danny, but continued to hold the knife. I didn't know how she would react, but I felt strangely calm. It was just a role I was playing, I reassured myself. I had to admit that he wasn't a bad director. We were following his script without even seeing it or knowing about it. Now, having had an epiphany, I still didn't know how to stop doing that. I considered yelling line to try to get some guidance. However, I wasn't so scared anymore. Ralph was still swinging the knife wildly in Danny and I's direction. He was great at fistfights, but he didn't seem to have any idea what to do with that knife. Finally, he settled on me. He jabbed the knife vaguely in my direction, but I ducked easily and couldn't escape the impression that that was exactly what he wanted. To my own surprise, I didn't care. I was in some kind of zone, perhaps, as was often the case with Ralph. I was just functioning, doing what was necessary. What bothered me most was that I was slowly turning into Mr. Haida the Kamikaze, which horrified me whenever I watched Ralph fight. Finally, Ralph seemed to have come to a decision. I could see it in his eyes. His neck wasn't reddening, which meant he was out of the zone, which meant he was in complete control of his actions. I barely managed to avoid another blow, and it was much closer than the previous ones. This blow was going to hurt me. Suddenly, I saw Danny appear behind him. I had almost forgotten about her, and apparently Ralph had too. He remembered it when the board she was holding hit the back of his head. He lunged forward anyway, stumbled, fell, and lost the knife. Quickly throwing it as far away from me as possible, I looked at him lying on the ground with a strangely satisfied smile on his handsome face. See? I knew it. She always chose you. You don't know anything, you idiot! Danny shouted. There was never anything between Andy and me. You're paranoid, and you need help. Yeah. No one can help me when I have friends and a wife like that. He was surprisingly calm as he stood up and started to walk away. Don't say I didn't warn you, he added over his shoulder. Don't say that what's about to happen is my fault. It's all on your conscience. We just looked at each other, shrugging, not feeling the need to follow him or do anything about it. You should stay with me tonight, Danny. I think so too, she replied softly, and the look she gave me made my legs give out. Next chapter. Danny and I got into it. It meant we became a couple. It meant that we could start banishing Ralph from our lives. It meant we could live in love like we were meant to. All my dreams had come true, and all that was left was to fight for her. With her at my side, I was sure I could do it. Looks like Ralph was right, she said softly, while I was still floating on a warm, fluffy cloud. He was right? I replied, not really interested in him at that moment. We're cheaters now, aren't we? Technically, I'm still married. Yeah. We weren't cheaters when he accused us of having an affair. Now I guess I'll have to live with that stigma, I replied, before kissing her again. I still couldn't believe I was finally in bed with the woman I had loved for as long as I could remember. She only chuckled. She seemed to be just as happy as I was. I guess that's the way it's going to be, but that mistake will soon be corrected. Mistake? Choosing the wrong man. What? You know, when we were kids, it was clear I was Ralph's girl. My parents, all my friends, even you, didn't just accept it, but reinforced it. It always seemed that way. It wasn't that simple, you know. There were two guys I liked. Looking back, I guess I never really had a choice. Suddenly, Ralph asserted himself and clung to me like a burdock. It would have been nice to take a step back, to look at things, to make a choice, but I never could. Really? I asked, mostly because nothing more intelligent had occurred to me. How can you seriously doubt that? She seemed upset by my rather trite answer. Look, I didn't mean to say, and then I ran out of words. I was 15 years old, for God's sake. Yeah, he's really good looking, but so are you. If I have to choose an odd combination, I'll take rugged looks but a soft heart. That's you. His combination of model beauty and hidden ruthlessness has always bugged me. Either way, I ended up with the wrong guy without making an informed choice. Instead of answering, I just kissed her. He always knew, of course, she continued. He's a cruel man under a thin layer of sweetness, but he's paranoid, which makes him pretty damn perceptive. He watched us like a hawk, and he didn't like what he saw. It fueled his insecurity. We both tried to hide it, but it was an open secret even among our friends. We were confirming his fears without wanting to, which made him even more jealous and alienated me even more. It was a vicious cycle. But what could I do? I just tried to hide my feelings even more. I probably could have been more careful about that too, but I didn't realize how bad I was at hiding my feelings until it was too late. I guess the fact that I've never had a real relationship gave me away. I always loved you, but you were unattainable. No one could ever compare to you. Yeah, that's why he was always trying to pick you up. It wasn't because he was such a good friend. He wanted you to be beyond competition. We all knew it would never work. Maria and I always felt so bad about it. Yeah, despite that damn pity, I stayed in our group just for you. It hurt to be the fifth wheel for years, watching you but never having you, but I couldn't leave you behind. I wonder if he was ever a friend at all. I even wondered recently why he saved my life back then. I think he knew they wouldn't have killed me. He just made the best of the situation by escalating it and saved my life by making me stay away from you. You never thought he set it up? No. Then he broke a few arms. If he'd hired them, he wouldn't have done it. Come on, you know how he is when he fights. He's probably just overreacting. He likes it that way. And seriously, he's a good fighter when he's in the zone. But 4 thugs? Really? That easy? Without a scratch? I think they'd have a better chance if he hadn't caught them off guard. I looked at her, flabbergasted, mostly because I'd never thought of that. The whole situation was terrible, such a stalemate, and everyone was miserable. We were all acting like a happy group of friends. But then he got violent. Why did you stay then? She looked at me disbelievingly. Really? For you, my favorite doll. He told me he would kill you if I left him. I had to protect the man I love. In the end, I only stayed because he blackmailed me. Staying with me ruined him, but he still couldn't let me go. I'm afraid he'll do something really bad, she added, after a few moments of thoughtful silence. Like kill himself? Maybe, or kill us. Sometimes he said he'd kill you if I left him. Sometimes he'd just say someone had to die. I'm not sure he even knew who he was talking about. I'd hate to see anything happen to him. I know what you mean. Despite everything that's happened, I wouldn't want that to happen either. I guess I'm the only one who feels sorry for him now. Don't worry, Andy, I don't love him anymore. But I feel sorry for him too. I also don't want to start my new life by driving my old husband to suicide. He needs help, but I don't know how to give it. I have tried everything. He won't accept professional help. Now all we have to do is accept what is going to happen. I'm finally with the man I love, and I'm not going back to Ralph. I've only loved you since I first paid attention to girls. You're right to try not to hurt him, but we may need to fight, and I'm willing to fight dirty if I have to. So am I. Eventually, his insane jealousy turned into a self-fulfilling prophecy. I was always afraid he'd self-destruct at some point. I think we all played our parts in his little drama. We all did what we could to make that trip to hell happen. What? Danny, if we had been honest about our feelings years ago, we wouldn't have helped escalate the situation as much as we did. We were both trying to do the right thing, to hide our feelings from him and from each other. Everyone seemed to know what was going on, including Ralph. Because of that unresolved tension, we kept adding steam to the tank until it exploded even more. I think we should get your stuff out of your apartment. What now? I had slightly different plans. Yeah, I think we should do it right now. So you want me to move in with you? What? Well, of course. I mean, what else? I was surprised by this completely unnecessary question. Why was she even questioning it? I already thought it was settled. Okay, she replied nonchalantly. Let's go. But I'll sleep on my left side, okay? I had to laugh. Okay. And I need plenty of closet space. Yes, my lady. Well, well, your preparations are well underway. We took my SUV and drove to their apartment, hoping Ralph would be at work. Sure enough, the apartment was empty, and we grabbed all her clothes in classic raid style, hoping none of the neighbors would call the police. In a hurry, we stuffed everything into my car, trying to avoid seeing Ralph. During the getaway, the tension left us, and we laughed and cheered each other on. At home, she immediately took over most of my closet and bathroom, and I was pleased to see that. She could mark her territory however she wanted, as long as it was in my house. Our house, that is. Next chapter. Life continued as it was. I was happy. Danny was radiant most of the time. We both spent a lot of time in bed. Everything was the way it was supposed to be. You know, we should invite him over. Ralph wasn't mentioned anymore, but we both knew he was still looming in the background, waiting for an opportunity. I hadn't forgotten about his threat, and I'm sure Danny hadn't either. That's why I was puzzled when she said it. You're right, Maria nodded with a serious look. She was here to plan the next reunion of friends, and I somehow assumed that Ralph would be excluded from now on. He's probably having a hard enough time losing Danny as it is. There's no need for him to lose all his friends, Maria continued. Danny looked at me, and I immediately realized that her motivation was somewhat different. I guessed that she wanted to keep her enemy close, but I had my doubts about that strategy. After all, it hadn't really worked with Ralph. Yes, she said. There's no need to exclude him. Maria, would you do me a favor and ask him? Things aren't going well with him and me. Of course, sweetheart, Maria replied in her typically motherly manner, putting her hand on Danny's arm reassuringly. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. Later, when Maria left, I brought it up again. Are you sure that was wise? Of course she knew what I was talking about. No, I'm not sure. But do you want to live like that? Looking over your shoulder all day long? Worrying if something's happened to someone you love? Yeah, you're right. If this goes on much longer, I'll be the next paranoid lunatic. I hate it when you leave the house alone. I've noticed, but I can't drag you with me when I meet a friend or go to work. I don't want to live in a prison. That needs to be resolved. Okay, Danny. I don't think he'll completely lose his temper with everyone around. She nodded, but looked as hesitant as I did. The meeting was pretty tense. Danny and I made no secret of the fact that we were a couple, but we were careful not to go overboard in showing our affections. Most of our friends seemed to approve and even pleased, but some seemed to frown. In general, everyone tried to ignore the elephant in the room and pretended to have a good time. I could have sworn everyone flinched when the doorbell rang. Despite all the planning and agreeing that it was for the best, I wished he hadn't come. I even expected him not to come, but he was the only one absent and no one had ordered a pizza. For several agonizing seconds, no one moved until Maria, as our hostess, finally worked up the courage to open her apartment door. Ralph? We heard her exaggeratedly friendly exclamation. I'm so glad you could come. I didn't hear his reply, but we all watched as he entered the living room, trying to portray his usual confident smile. This time it seemed screwed on and obviously fake, but the meaning was clear. It's no big deal. I'm still in charge. All talking stopped and we all looked at him like he was an idiot. The scene was awkward even before the background music suddenly stopped. As a result, it felt like time had stopped. This is what hell is like, I thought. Finally, Paul broke the spell by jumping up and taking over the music. Everyone immediately started doing something, and most of it didn't make much sense. Finally, Ralph deigned to look at Danny and me. His eyes were cold as he gave us an exaggeratedly loud thumbs up and an incredulous wink. The message was clear. He didn't care. I could have Danny. She could easily be replaced. His reputation was intact. Except it wasn't. He was tense as a bowstring. He moved like a robot. He was constantly looking around for confirmation. This was not the confident Ralph we knew. Worst of all was the pity, which I had encountered often enough. Now he was the odd man out, with the comfort and good advice of the girls heaped upon him. He tried to bear everything stoically, making sure to stay away from Danny or me. After a few minutes, I heard Lisa telling him about a cute single coworker, and that if he played his cards right, he could get a date with her. Damn, I thought. That was unnecessarily cruel, even though I knew she meant well. Mesmerized, I watched his neck take on a horrible reddish hue. Lisa hadn't grown up with Ralph like we had, so she might not have known his signs. Completely oblivious, and with only good intentions, she continued her search. Ralph, don't worry. Some nice girl will hook you up in no time. Mesmerized, I watched Ralph slowly continue to cook inside me. I could almost hear his thoughts. He was a doomsayer, the guy all women lusted after. He certainly didn't need pity or reassurance that he could get the girl. It was a humiliating demonstration, but I didn't want to make matters worse by interfering with it. It would certainly put a landmine under the nose he was currently on. I feel so sorry for you. I mean, when you get dumped like that? Oh shit, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse. I was afraid he was going to kill her on the spot, but he just roughly shoved her aside. She was clearly shocked that the handsome man she had always liked could behave like that. Ralph looked around, his gaze settling on Maria, who was the only truly attractive woman in the room, aside from Danny. To our collective shock, he just kissed her. I have no idea what he was thinking. Perhaps he wanted to demonstrate that he could easily get any woman he wanted. As soon as she came to her senses, she shoved him back and slapped him hard. The sound was deafening as all talking stopped anyway. Paul was just about to help her when we all saw her pull her knee back for a good old-fashioned kick between the legs. Ralph saw it too, tried to duck and fell into a large flower pot. The result was horribly undignified. He was lying in the dirt after being rejected in the most public way. He had completely humiliated himself, and the worst part was that everyone, including me, felt sorry for him at that moment. Everyone saw him in a new light. The collective rose-colored glasses were off, and he knew it. This time it wasn't just his neck that was red, but his entire face. Strangely, he turned to me for help. I realized that I'd always been his helper and wingman, even though it now seemed that we had long since fallen out of love. But not this time. Not when 14 people looked at him in awkward silence, when they turned from friends to those who knew him, when he suddenly looked like a little lost boy, smiling, confused. The drama has reached its final act. By and large, Ralph's role had become that of a tragic loser, humiliated, and leaving everyone disappointed. It was the ultimate defeat. I watched him while Danny looked away, no longer wanting to help him or even watch this undignified spectacle. There was a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. He had looked at her as the moon, reflecting only his light. Now she was the sun, and he seemed to have suspected it all along. I suddenly realized that he had never really looked at her, never seen her for the treasure she was until she left him for me. It was as if he was finally able to step out of his role, to see things for what they were, and mourn the missed opportunities. Remembering our childhood, a time when our friendship was still pure, and determined to be the bigger man, I reached out to him one last time. He accepted it gratefully, but knew from my eyes that it was intended. We were done. He stood up, looked around for support, and saw only what hurt the most: pity. I'd never seen him so weak, so defeated. Worst of all, I knew how he felt. He was on the verge of a breakdown. Without another word, he turned and walked away before we could see this final humiliation. Isn't it amazing how hot it is already? After all, it's only May, Paul said suddenly. Amazing, isn't it? Hey, is there any potato salad left? Tom contributed as if nothing had happened. Soon we heard the girls giggling over some nonsensical nonsense someone had found on the internet. I looked at Danny, and we shrugged at the same time. It was like Ralph didn't even exist. It was just that everyone had decided not just to exclude him from the group, but to delete him as if he'd never existed. We honestly didn't care anymore. He disappeared from our lives, and as far as I know, no one ever heard from him again. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.